Well, the question of what Jesus looks like, in a way, we can go a number of different directions on this. About 15 years ago or so, Popular Mechanics put out this image of a first century Middle Eastern man. They did DNA testing or testing of bone fragments and things like that. And you'll see it pop up on the internet ever so often. If you've seen it, it's just an average-looking Middle Eastern man with a beard, dark hair, dark eyes, dark complected, all that sort of thing. So I guess we can start there and say, what did he look like? Well, he probably looked kind of like that picture, but that doesn't give us much to go on.
It's nice that Popular Mechanics has given us a good run at it, right? Yeah. I mean, he was born under the law, Galatians 4. We know he was Jewish. We know that there are particular facial features. I wasn't aware that people have kind of represented the common man of, first century in the Levant. I mean, that's kind of nice to know. I grew up in the Evangelical Covenant Church, and there was a Chicago artist, last name Salmon, who I believe in around 1940 did this famous portrait that earlier had been kind of a pencil drawing. And from what I understand, it's, 500 million times reproduced. So I remember growing up with an idea of that's what Jesus looked like. But I think social critical theory, all of a sudden people began to realize, no, this is an enculturated view. He didn't have blue eyes. He wasn't, out of Norway. And so, you do have these questions. This question lingers in the mind of people. We are curious. What did he look like?
Yeah, and I think that explains a lot of those pictures. I think my grandmother had the same picture hanging up in her kitchen or something that I saw all my growing up years. The reality is that the Bible really never gives us a description of Jesus, right? It doesn't describe that many people, at least in terms of their physical characteristics.
Yeah, so I'm with you on that. So what it does do is it wants us to know he shared our humanity. It doesn't give us much about his facial features or his physical frame. We know John 20 or 19, he thirsted on the cross. I thirst, this common human feature. He wept. He has this. The Bible does want you to know he shares your humanity.
Yeah, I think that's the important point to make, right? He's like us in every way, but without sin. So the Bible never says Jesus was, 5'6" and 150 pounds, or he had dark hair, or his beard was this long, or his hair was this long. Although we get features, right? He had a beard because they pulled on it, and then we can speculate about those things. But it doesn't seem that important in terms of what the picture of Jesus that the Bible is presenting to us. So let me ask you a question then.
Yeah.
Is it okay for us to represent Jesus? You wrote a kid's story Bible that
right.
My family has used a lot, and in there we have some representations of Jesus, don't we?
Right. So let me take you back 18 years. We were working on a children's Bible. It became the Big Picture Story Bible. It's going in, 25, 26 languages. But one of the critiques has been, have you violated the second commandment? Have you in illustrative form depicted an image of Christ that the scriptures actually would have us steer clear of? And at first I wasn't quite sure what to do with the critique. But in regard to the question, what did he look like? All you got to think about, Chris, is like church history. The humanist movement, art, the great masters, this depiction of, Mary, an infant. Much of the art the great art in the world has these depictions, but there's an element within Christianity that would say none of that really should be done. So, you've got Oliver Cromwell ridding the world, and then later reform movements that would really be reticent to try to do that. But maybe what we ought to do is say, the Bible's concern isn't with the image. Hebrews, we know he's the exact icon, the image of God. but it's with the idea, image and idea.
That's good.
The idea is he represents us, that in him we see the fullness and glory of God, John 1, and that people did see him.
Yeah, and in him, the fullness of deity is contained bodily. And it's hard for us to wrap our minds totally around that, what that means. And I think you're right that throughout church history, even go back into the 7th, 8th century, there's the iconoclast controversy. People have been talking about this for centuries. And so, and that's not even the main point of our question, so maybe we can.
But I think that's maybe one area where I would probably think to have an icon that I am now asking myself to be led into further worship through the visualization of an image, that's not something that I would probably advocate we ought to be going after.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go as well, in that, it's one question to ask, should we have an image of Jesus? It's another question to say, should we picture a particular image of Jesus while we're praying? Should we have it in our mind and kind of focus our even veneration and worship towards that? That seems like dangerous ground to move into, because like we've said, the Bible doesn't give us a physical description of Jesus. So if whether it's from somebody else's mind or our own imagination, we're creating this physical depiction of Jesus that we're then praying to, that strikes me as inching close to, if not passing the line, into idolatry.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that conviction that you share. Recently I was preaching through the Gospel of John, and in chapter 1, in the prologue, he's borrowing this language about nobody has ever seen God, but this one explains him. And he talks about Moses and going from glory and the glory of God. And it's borrowing on, I really believe, Exodus 33, where Moses says, I want to see you. This longing to see God. And he says, well, nobody sees me. You go in the cleft of the rock. And what's fascinating is the name of God is what comes through. So when our desire is for a visual image, what God decides to communicate is his character, his everlasting steadfast love, that he is gracious and kind and forgiving. And so to me, that's what we ought to be thinking about when we think about going to prayer, is focusing on those aspects. And that's what John does in the gospel. That's what he wants to reveal. He wants to reveal the glory in who Jesus is by what he's come to do rather than what he looked like.
Yeah, and I think you've put your finger on it. Well, several things there, but one of them is the desire to see God is something we're made for, right? Moses' request to see God, that desire was not wrong in and of itself. Our desire to see Jesus, I think that comes from a good place, because we're made to want to see God. But what we get of him now is what you're describing. It's this description of his character, and we get to know him more by getting to know more about him. But the hope in all of this is in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul tells us that, we see through a mirror dimly right now, but one day we will see face to face. So whatever it means to see dimly right now, whatever it means to say face to face one day, I think what we can say is one day we will look into Jesus' face. That desire to know what he looks like, to see him, will be satisfied. Yeah. And that's an amazing hope.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. You just think about if we had lived at a different time, first century Palestine, over about a 20-year period, it's possible that we would have seen what he looked like. But the scriptures are doing just what you're doing. They're impressing us with a longing to be in communion with him. And he's gone away to prepare a place, and he will bring us into his very presence.